Okay, looks like we're ready to go. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority on Thursday, December 19, 2024. It is 7:32 a.m., and the people that work for the city of Edina are furiously cleaning the parking lot and the sidewalks, and all of us have made it in. Member Pierce is out of town, but we will be able to get some good work done with the four of us here. So I'm going to remind people that these meetings are hybrid in nature, and folks may be watching online. They'll be able to call in for community comment. There is no public hearing this morning, so they'll be able to call in for community comment if they have an issue they want to address with the HRA that's not on the agenda this morning or scheduled for a future public hearing. Having provided that information, I'll call the meeting to order and ask that the roll be called.
Commissioner Risser.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Agnew.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We've got a form of meeting agenda that's been published in advance of this meeting and for the public and for the HRA commissioners as well. Is there anyone on staff or a commissioner that wishes to modify the meeting agenda in any form or fashion? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published?
So moved. A second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Agnew to approve the meeting agenda as published. Any further conversation on that issue? All those in favor of approval of the meeting agenda as published, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Meeting agenda is approved. The next thing on that meeting agenda is community comment. So let's get that phone number up on the screen. And then is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the HRA in a matter of concern to them? All right. Seeing no one coming forward, we'll check with you, Director Benarat.
I do not have any residents on the call right now. However, because there is a brief delay in the broadcast, I'd recommend we wait 1 minute before moving on to give people that opportunity if they're interested. My clock shows that it's 7:35. I will come back to you at 7:36 or when I have a caller, whichever is first.
All right. And while we're waiting for that, I just want to congratulate you on that making it in here this morning. Requiring you to leave at 5:30 in the morning to get here by 7:30. Oh, yeah.
All right, it's
Okay. Our executive director usually reports out on any community comments that were made on the at the prior meeting. Do we have anything to report out on?
Nothing to report on today.
My recollection as well. There are 3 items on the consent agenda this morning. Is there any commissioner that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Is there a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda on a single motion?
A second.
Commissioner Jackson moves and Commissioner Agnew seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. Any further conversation on that issue? All those in favor of adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. The consent agenda items are approved and adopted. And now we are going to go to the heart of the meeting this morning, which is the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda. We've got a couple of matters to deal with there, plus some executive director comments. And the first matter up this morning is something that Our staff people and the developer have been working on, along with our advisors from Ellers and Dorsey and Whitney, and that is related to affordable housing. And our affordable housing development manager, Stephanie Hawkinson, has this matter. Ms. Hawkinson, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Good morning. It was a pleasure driving in. Today, I am seeking support for the proposed development at 7200 France. As you know, this parcel is the northwest corner of 72nd and France, across from the Macy's Furniture Store. And you've seen this before as we've talked about this project. So this is what it is right now when you are driving south on France Avenue. The property is vacant. It was a office building that became functionally obsolete and has been demolished. And I apologize for the next slide. I am not a graphic artist, but this is what it could be if you, the same view, if you were driving down south after the apartment has been developed. But in order for this to happen, it needs financial assistance. The two parcels at 7200 and 7250 are already located in a TIF district, with TIF financing awarded to the development of 7250, which includes the public infrastructure on both parcels. With the redevelopment agreement that was approved for 7250, it's anticipated that the 7200 would be a hotel and not need gap financing. The hotel proved not to be financially feasible, so the developer of 7250 formed a new partnership with Afton Development Group to develop a 150-unit apartment. The elements included in the existing redevelopment agreement remain the same as listed on the slide, including the north-south road and trail, the streetscaping, and permanent public easements. The financing that was approved for 7250 included 90% of the tax increment that would be collected from the development of both sites. There are two notes, one tied to the development of 7250 itself and the other tied to the development of 7200. It was anticipated that the TIF district would be placed for a maximum of 26 years. 10% of the collected increment would be directed to the HRA for administrative expenses and/or pooling. As stated, the developer pivoted from the earlier anticipation that a hotel would be developed at 7200. The plan preliminarily approved on November 6th shows a 150-unit apartment building. As stated, there is a financial gap in order to construct this. In November, I came before you with a proposal that reflected 8% of the units affordable in perpetuity, which would be a deviation from the affordable housing policy that requires 10% of the units to be affordable. Yet, the policy allows for the Housing and Redevelopment Authority and the City Council to approve exemptions from the policy based on alternative public purposes. This exchange of affordable units in order to extend the affordability period and reduce the amount of gap needed seemed to align with that policy. Yet, a deviation from the policy may require amendments to the ordinance and resolution that were passed for site plan. So today, I will present an alternative that aligns with the policy with 10% of the units being affordable. To address the Commissioner's expressed support of permanent affordability, the developer wants to have the units remain affordable in perpetuity. With more units affordable, the amount of requested gap has increased. The affordable housing policy states that when the city financing is involved, the units must remain affordable for a minimum of 30 years. Prior to the last legislative session, permanent affordability was not allowed to be secured by a declaration of restrictive covenants. That was changed. But the policy has not yet been changed to reflect that. Until the legislative change occurred, the policy captured long affordability periods through the use of the word minimum to allow some flexibility as developments get negotiated. The PUD ordinance states, for any housing development, affordable housing units must be included in the project per the city's affordable housing policy at the time of final approval. Similarly, the resolution states, the Phase 2 project must provide the required affordable housing units within the building to be compliant with the city's affordable housing policy. The ordinance still requires a second reading prior to final adoption, and the site plan still requires final approval. Staff have been advised by the city attorney that to proceed with a deviation to the policy, whether a reduction or addition to the policy's prescribed terms, the proposed development would need to restart the public approval process, including reopening the public hearings. Due to the timing constraints and spending down the spark funds, going through the site plan approval process again is just not feasible. In addition to providing affordable housing, 7200 France Apartments provides other public benefits, such as improving equity inclusion on the job site. The developer is working with their expected general contractor to make good faith efforts in achieving inclusionary goals. The proposed development also contributes to the tax base. As a vacant parcel as it is now, 7200 and 7250 have had a declining tax value since 2017. As the city's overall tax capacity has increased, these parcels' valuation has gone in the opposite direction. Because of that decline, these parcels are contributing less and less to the general community funding needs. By way of an example, in 2017, for every $100 that the city levied for its budget, these two properties were responsible for 15 cents. Right now, for every $100 the city levies, they are only responsible for 9 cents. The rest of the tax base is making up the 6 cents difference. Some of the share of the difference is new growth, but some is also other properties that have appreciated since 2017, whereas this one has not. There's more than we want to get into, but the point is that the TIF district was created to help turn around that phenomenon. Once developed and no longer in TIF, the two parcels' expected tax value would be responsible for 78 cents of the share of $100. This parcel's existing value will still be providing their same 9% share, or excuse me, 9 cent share during the TIF district, but the properties would be taking on a much larger share once complete. And 7250 is happily on its way to becoming a reality. So what will it cost to bring this back on the tax roll as a strong contributing member of the tax base? In November, I presented a budget that reflected a gap of $3.8 million that supported development that included only 12 affordable units, as stated, with deviation. As stated previously, it's not feasible to reopen the public hearing process to seek that deviation due to the identified funding source. Therefore, we re-underwrote the development with 15 affordable units. Adding 3 affordable units reduces the net operating income and impacts investors' returns. We are now seeking just shy of $4.9 million. Without city financing, the rate of return on the investor equity is far below market. As investors can invest anywhere globally and are not tied to investing in Edina, let alone Minnesota, the $12.7 million in investor equity is not achievable unless market returns are achieved. The $4.9 million requested is 8.8% of the total development cost as compared to 23% that comes from investor equity. There was a time when market rate developments could absorb the reduced rents on affordable units. That was prior to COVID, increasing interest rates, and labor shortages. As stated, investors can invest anywhere and generally invest in projects and in areas where the risk and reward investment is easiest. When the stock market was weaker, investing in housing development was a more attractive alternative. Multifamily developers and financiers have reported that investors are shying away from the Twin Cities metropolitan area due to the introduction of rent control taking root in St. Paul, that they look at the metro as a whole. The region for some is deemed too risky. Developments in Edina are subject to these market forces. Other cost drivers include interest rates. As these increase, less capital can be borrowed. The development is also including covered parking that serves 7250, for which they are not receiving revenue. This is a requirement of the redevelopment agreement for 7250. Finally, city policies do impact costs. Staff is recommending that spark funds be used and structured as a forgivable loan. Within the redevelopment agreement, there are loan terms that must be adhered to achieve and forgive the funds. The requirements are as follows: that they must be ready to go by July 1st. They will deposit the spark funds with an escrow agent, and we will draw on the funds during the construction period until December 1st to meet the deadlines. They will develop 150 units of residential housing, create 15 affordable units, comply with the sustainable building policy, supply a certificate of completion, and the loan will be forgiven upon proving up qualified costs. We will look at the budget once construction's done to make sure that what we're seeing now is similar to what we see at the end, or it accounts for the need at the end. And the return on cost of the investor will not exceed 7%. And there will be a declaration of restrictive covenants recorded against the property that will keep the units affordable in perpetuity, as is now allowed with the state legislation last year. So why Spark? Well, one reason is that these were awarded in 2021, and we discussed this at the November and at the Macy's site. So I'm not going to go on a great deal of detail here, but the main point is the state legislation provided limited authority to the cities to use unallocated pool to spur development. The funding authority expires at the end of 2025. Unused Spark funds would be returned to the county, with the city only receiving a portion of it. To keep the entirety of the funds within the city, staff is requesting that they be used to make the 7,200 France apartments a reality and get the property on a higher level in the tax rolls, including the public benefits previously mentioned, and the remainder supporting the enclave development at the Macy's site. The estimated timeline for both developments would allow the city to invest all the Spark funds locally. As stated previously, there are legislative requirements regarding the Spark funds, that each project must deliver new construction or substantial rehabilitation of brick and mortar structures. It must create jobs, including at minimum construction jobs, and it must be determined to be able to proceed without, or unable to proceed without public funding. Spark funds currently have had a beginning balance about $9.3 million. There have been some awards made, and with today's request of $4.86 million, there would be about $591,000 that would be allocated to offset the TIF awarded to the Macy's site. So again, today I'm seeking approval for the just shy of $4.9 million in forgivable loan using Spark funds to support the development of this project. And as again, this is greater than what I asked for in November, but that's due to having more affordable units. Questions to consider when making this decision. Will the Spark funds be used to spur development? Is it preferable to use time-limited Spark funds to spur development at the site, or wait for the development that may or may not, need gap financing? Because we don't know. If this doesn't get developed, we don't know what the future holds. A lower value development or a longer time vacant requires longer duration of the existing TIF district that's already there. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. And which is preferable, 8% of the units affordable in perpetuity or 10% of units in perpetuity? The first option would require revisiting the PUD. So we also, another part of this request is amending the existing redevelopment agreement at 7,200, 7,250. And so we have three hypotheticals of what would occur. One is 7,200 remains vacant for a surface parking lot. Two is that Spark funds are used to spur the development at 7,200 for the apartments. And three, we wait around for a future possible development that could occur at that site. And here are the tax capacities. The existing is in orange. Then we have hypothetical 1, hypothetical 2, and hypothetical 3. Clearly, the one that brings in the greatest tax capacity is with the creation of 7,200 apartments. So hypothetical 1. This is the existing redevelopment agreement with the $5.9 million TIF note that has already been awarded to 7,250 France. So if 7200 is not developed, the second TIF note will not be available. 10% of the administration fee would be collected, which would equate to about $685,000. It's estimated that to pay that TIF note, the TIF district would need to be open for the full 26 years, with a decertification occurring in 2051. If today's request is approved using Spark funds, 7250 would benefit from the second TIF note, and the estimated term for the payment of both notes is reduced to 16 years due to the increment created by 7200. In addition, with approval of the First Amendment, 20% of the increment could be directed to the HRA administration and could bring in $2.3 million for pooling or for public infrastructure. It could be used for affordable housing or other eligible costs. Under this scenario, the TIF district could get a decertification in 2041 versus 2051, 10 years earlier than if 7200 does not come online. Oh, that was hypothetical 2. And then hypothetical 3 is wait for some future development at 7200 that is yet unknown. The first TIF note for 7250 is not impacted, but the second one is, as they require 7200 to provide enclosed parking. And we don't know when a future project could come forward, what it looks like. We don't know, and it would have to include, based on the existing redevelopment agreement, include the enclosed parking, but other than that, there's not too many unknowns. We don't know when it will happen, and so the estimated term of the TIF district that's already in place would be, again, the full 26 years. The HRA administrative portion would remain 10% to ensure the adequate increment is available to cover the existing 7250 note. And the estimated accrued funds with a possible future development is increased to about $907,000. So here are those 3 hypotheticals next to each other that shows the comparison of keeping it as a surface parking lot, not approving it, waiting, hypothetical 3, for future possible unknown development, or today, what's before you today is hypothetical 2. Finally, there's an impact on the development of affordable housing scorecard. With the addition of 15 units that would remain affordable in perpetuity, which would be the second project that would have in perpetuity. The first one is 4040, and that's 100% affordable. So this would be the first one within a market rate development. We would achieve over 50% of our goal for 50% AMI units. And then I just wanted, because it was mentioned at a previous meeting, I included this slide to show the impact of the affordable housing policy. So the 10 years prior to the adoption of the policy by the City Council and the HRA, that is what you see in the green. Very little was happening in single-family ownership that was affordable, nothing in NOAA preservation. 100% affordable, there was one project in that 10-year period, 66 West. And inclusionary housing, towards right before the policy was approved, there was some negotiating to include affordable units. After the policy, in the 10 years since then, you can see a marked difference. So there has been some impact. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I have other supporting document information that was included in the packet, but it's tangentially related to this. So I'm available for questions, and Ted is here, and our legal and financial advisors are here, and Ari left his home at 6:15, and we are expecting him at some point.
All right, questions from commissioners for Manager Hawkinson? Yes.
You can let Kate go first.
Pardon me?
Commissioner Agnew.
Oh.
Thank you very much for the thorough presentation. So my first question is about hypothetical number 3. And so in a few of the views, we were able to see that the kind of future tax base estimation was lower than hypothetical number 2. Can you walk through what assumptions were going into that led to a lower tax base in the future?
I am going to defer to Mr. Anhut on that one.
Thank you, Commissioners. Nick Anhut with Ehlers and Associates, financial advisors to the HRA. And I assisted in putting together these hypotheticals. We have the benefit of the original agreement with 7250 that did contemplate a hotel on that site. And so as a commercial hotel, the property classification is slightly different from a rental property. So that's one change. It's also a lower taxable valuation. Housing in Edina is appreciates and has a higher value than many commercial properties on a per square foot or even on a per unit basis. And so we did use that hotel model because that is actually what was agreed upon and what stands today to serve as what that potential development could be. We also looked at what if there were some other type of surface level type improvements to have maybe a slightly lower commercial footprint and still provide some of the parking that would need to be shared. And all of those seem to be at a valuation less than that hotel, so that's the one that we used.
Thank you. And am I correct in understanding, kind of at a macro level, the reason that we would assume the footprint would be smaller is because if in the near future it remained as a parking lot, after that it would no longer be eligible for TIF funding, and therefore the scale of the project might be smaller, which would also draw to a lower tax base. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think there's a couple of different things. So right now it is potentially going to be used for shared parking to serve the parcel to the south. So anything that does happen on it needs to address that shared parking reality, which means that they need to maybe overbuild specifically on 7200. That's going to come at a cost to develop that property. Not saying it can't be overcome, but so I don't think this has anything to do with the existing TIF arrangement. It's more of just the practicality on that site and what could come forward that is either not going to need additional assistance, which would change the analysis, and be marketable on its own. And so that's kind of the thought on that.
Okay, and maybe I was misunderstanding or thinking about the future scenario differently. So if this housing project were to not move forward and it were to remain a parking lot for some time and redevelopment happened on it in 5 years, would that project be eligible for TIF funding?
It would. So the developer's investment on the 7250 agreement is actually encompassing the entire 2 properties and all the site improvements that were approved as part of that land use arrangement. So they're investing in all of the site work and infrastructure that serves both parcels. The agreement was struck within the TIF that, we didn't exactly know exactly what was going to be built vertically on 7200, and we didn't necessarily have a time frame where we could really hold them to it. And so as a condition, the additional TIF that was necessary to build all those site improvements, we're going to hold back on that until something actually happens on 7200. So you're not obligated to make payments on that note, even though the investment and all the improvements have already incurred. So anything that happens on that site is going to help fund that initial investment that is already made, that is consistent across all of these hypotheticals. It's just a matter of to what degree it's going to provide funding capacity within the TIF district that can pay that balance down. And in the case of the housing, it's at a much higher degree that allows for that TIF obligation to be satisfied much earlier, whereas if it's a hotel or even a lesser commercial development, it's going to take a longer period of time in the full capacity of that TIF district. If that makes sense.
It does, thank you. My last question then is for Manager Hawkinson. So the calculation that I did is for the increase for the additional 3 units, similar to my question when we were talking about this last time. It's approximately $364,000 per additional unit that we're making an investment for. talk to me about how that feels to you compared to other ways that we could make similar investments within the community.
Chair, Commissioners, first of all, we'd have to combine all the 15 units and divide the gap by all 5, because in part, with the additional 3 units, some of them are larger units, 2-bedroom units, so the impact of the difference between the rent, the market rate rents and the affordable rents it decreases the net operating income overall, which is what causes the gap. So overall, let me see, I have it in here, what the gap is. So it would be $324,000 per unit when it's 15 units of gap. And that is completely consistent with what we have seen actually even prior to COVID, is the cost is, the loss of revenue by having affordable units in a market rate development. So that is consistent.
Thank you.
And again, with 100% affordable, that may be the gap for 100% affordable on an affordable unit, but you have a lot more sources of money to access from the state, the county, the Met Council. In market rate developments, you don't. It all rests with the city. So that is completely aligned.
Thank you. And just want to clarify one thing you said. So the additional 3 units that we're adding in and would get as a part of this mix in hypothetical number 2, those 3 units are 2 bedrooms?
They include more of the larger units. So it is, if my memory serves me, 3 alcoves, which are semi-studios. They have a private wall. 5 one-bedrooms, 5 one-bedrooms plus den, and 2 2-bedrooms. So we increase the 1-bedroom plus den and the 2 bedrooms when we increase the number of units.
Okay, so before it would have been the 3 alcove, the 5 1-bed, and 4 1-bed plus den. So we're getting larger units with this
Getting larger
additional.
units with the 3
Okay.
additional.
Thank you very much. That concludes my questions.
Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So going back to the chart that showed the tax value of this, I'm confused as to where, no, back further than that. And they're not, one thing I would prefer if the slides were numbered, because I'm trying to take notes. I'm like, well, that slide there, if it's possible on PowerPoint in the future, because then I could like write down, go to slide 4.
They are when we create them, but when they're put in presentation view, the numbers go away.
Okay. So looking at this slide, I was confused. Will the tax revenue from 7200 France go to pay off the TIF note, or will it go into the coffers of the city? This looks like this is the tax capacity, and that's how much it grows. But the revenue from that is going to go towards paying down the TIF for the overall site. It's not going to go into the general fund. Is that correct?
That is correct. With 7,200, the TIF note would be in place for an estimated 16 years versus 26 years.
Okay.
So it would go back into the regular tax base. The TIF could be, the council could decertify the district early, and then it would go back to the general revenue, or the tax allocators. You may decide at that point to not decertify it early and to pool it, but that would, yes, it would be in place. So 7,200 would contribute to the TIF note that is in place.
Okay, good, thank you. I got a little, I thought, oh, wow, that's a lot of tax revenue. But it's going to, the increment will go to pay off the TIF note, and the TIF note will be paid off more quickly with this inclusion. And Mr. Anhut that was my other question, I think Commissioner Agnew asked, that this would, in hypothetical 3, still be available for TIF funding. TIF funding would be available for a development there because the whole site is the TIF district.
Yes, and I'm going to have, yeah, there would be, but some of the increment from whatever's developed in the future would be to support the B note on 7250. So what's left over, once those two notes are paid, is smaller.
Okay.
So that would support a future development. Plus, the TIF district would already be in place. So the term is short, the remaining term would be shorter too, which would decrease how much would be available.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Risser.
Thank you, and I have some questions that I may need Nick to respond to. I did a little digging, and it wasn't for this project, but it was for another TIF issue, and came across language, but I wasn't able to pursue it, that said TIF financing cannot be used to pay for improvements that serve mainly decorative or aesthetic purposes. Is that true? Or maybe, I don't want to put you on the spot, but here's my concern. And I agree with the stipulation that affordable units need to be the same as all the other units in the buildings, and, not have have those granite countertops and not the linoleum and all that. But is that a decorative element, and can we even be using TIF in this situation?
This actually might be a question better served for Mr. Lindgren, but my experience on the topic of what you can finance, that language is not present in the statute, but it's some guidance as far as specifically providing what I would say is more like a public type of improvement.
Apologies to you and to Mr. Lindgren. Too early, the coffee hasn't kicked in. If you could respond to that.
Chair, Commissioners Jay Lindgren with Dorsey and Whitney, Special Counsel of the HRA. I agree with what Mr. Anhud said. The way that I've always interpreted it is that you can use tax increment for what I would call placemaking. I mean, and so doing elements that create the there, if you will, aren't purely just decorative. Now, to your question about, which is what I think it is if we're ultimately using tax increment to change the quality of the affordable units, is that what you were talking about, is that you were thinking is decorative? Because I'm not sure that's what's happening here
No,
either.
that's not what I know, and actually, I mean, all of the units are the same, and there are decorative elements in it. And TIF there's language that says if the cost of equipment is higher because of the design attached to it, and I'm thinking, a refrigerator that looks really beautiful is probably more expensive than an ordinary looking one. And so does that apply in this situation? Like, can we actually be investing TIF in a market rate development for affordable units? Thank you.
Yeah, so two answers to your question. First of all, I think we can, because actually what we're doing is not necessarily paying for those elements, we're paying for other gaps within the project. I mean, for example, you don't under your policy, but actually under the redevelopment TIF district law, you could pay for bricks and mortar for a building. So the question is, does it become more decorative than what's necessary? But actually in this case, and I'm not trying to avoid the question, but there is a very direct answer, which is for 7,200, we are using spark funds, which aren't the same as redevelopment district TIF proceeds. That special 2021 legislation has a much broader use of funds and actually allows you to invest pretty much anything as long as it spurs private development. Okay, I mean, I could go deeper than that, but actually, even if we were to apply that decorative in this case, as you were talking about, it wouldn't apply to 7,200 because that isn't the source of the TIF funds. Does that make sense?
Thank you, that is helpful. Okay, and then the other questions, a comment. Okay, for this project, we have granted variances that do have value. going from 4 to 6 stories. So that adds value to the project. We allowed it to have a mass that's about 150% of what the building is on 7250. So that adds value. And I feel like we've already provided quite a bit for this project. The other comment that I need to make is that I'm not viewing spark funds in that deadline of December 31st, 2025 as, I'm not seeing it as use it or lose it, because I know we could take funds, turn them back over to Hennepin County. A third of that could flow into our general fund. There are things that we could support that that would be very important in my view to support. And so the Spark Fund use it or lose it philosophy is something that I want to push back against. We have already gone through the process of a public hearing. I know that's a lot of time and a lot of energy. So I see the logic of going back to 10% affordable housing. However, given what we have provided already, and also with Spark, it's not just use it or lose it, but it's ensure that it is being invested in a financially responsible manner. And, I get the whole point of it needs to spark development, and I'm not sure even adding this is going to get things going and across the finish line. The other thing is I feel like total cost is not calculated when we look at these projects. Yes, residential will generate more revenue, but over that 16-year period, it will probably also draw more on our municipal resources, our police, and that's not calculated in, and we really need to start getting total cost when we're being asked to weigh these projects. Overall, it's adding more market rate. Yes, there'll be 15 units of affordable. We have already gone past, and I don't know if you have the number of how many units we have built beyond what the Met Council is asking us to build of market rate by 2030. We have passed that.
I do not have that number. I did include, just on a broad scale, there is still a housing shortage in the metropolitan area. And there is in Minnesota and nationally. And that's market rate, that's affordable, that's everything. So there is a housing crisis generally. And so we had, when the Met Council, they do give a forecast of what they anticipate the market rate development will be, but it's not a limit by any means. And we have seen, this is from the Twin Cities Housing Alliance, that there has been a sharp decline in multifamily permits, and they do anticipate that rents in the next couple of years on market rate developments as well are going to go up tremendously because of the shortage of housing that's being built. So I'm not personally concerned about market rate developments being built because it helps the overall supply in the region.
Thank you. That is all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner. So, one of the things I think that you inferred in your presentation is that the use of these spark funds under either scenario 1 or scenario 2 essentially becomes a public investment in affordable housing in perpetuity in our community. Is that right?
That is correct.
Is that a fair assumption on my part?
That is a fair assumption.
And the way we describe these funds, these spark funds, as use it or lose it by 12/31/25 is not, it's not quite, for me, it's use it on projects that we think meet the requirements of the statute, or it goes back to its conventional distribution formula, whatever's left at 12/31/25. And I think what you're telling us is that based on your analysis with the public finance people that we use and our attorneys and your own analysis as an expert in the field, think that this is a worthwhile investment making to help us achieve our affordable housing goals.
Chair, Commissioners, I do. I also think that right now we have a roughly $6 million of Spark, and why not invest it in Edina, since it was, the city was allowed to use the $6 million for this type of purpose. Why not keep all of it within the city? That will ultimately have a long-term return that will benefit the city.
And your calculation at $324,000 per unit for those 15 units, the inference I got there too is that aligns with our past practice. And I'm thinking of our investment in Aon or some of the other things that we've done in our community.
Chair, Commissioners, the city's investment in affordable housing units on 100% affordable is less per unit because of these other funding partners that we have, being able to tap into the state, the county, the Metropolitan Council. We don't have access to those other sources when it comes to affordable units within a market rate building, but the dollar amount is in line with what the gap is on an affordable unit. It just, when it's in a market rate building, it rests on the city rather than being able to be spread out through all these other funding sources. But yes, the amount is in alignment.
Understood. Yeah, that might not be the total cost per door, but it is. Is that another way of saying it?
What I'm saying is
Maybe
I
this is
believe
more of a
that
question for
with some
Mr.
of our other
Carlson.
projects, the city contribution to an affordable unit and 100% affordable project is roughly 50 or 60,000 per door. We're here, but the overall gap for that door is about 350, actually more, because affordable housing is very expensive to do because you have so many funding sources and so many attorneys and so many hands in the cost to develop an affordable housing unit is over $400,000, and this is actually about $370,000, so it's less expensive actually to develop often, not always, depends on the building, a market rate because of all the variables that are involved in an affordable, but the city portion is smaller in 100% affordable development because so many sources are brought in. So the city responsibility for an affordable units is greater in a market rate development, but the gap in aggregate is in line.
Helpful too. I'm thinking about when we had this conversation around the Macy's site, and just generally from seeing what we're experiencing, I think metro-wide, you know, to reinforce the data that you had up in front of us here about pressure on housing in terms of production and cost. I was in a meeting a couple months ago with the Met Council and legislators and others, other cities around the metro, and they expressed the thought that by 2050 we're going to add another 650,000 people in the metropolitan area. We're going to get some of those folks coming in here, but that those 650,000 people were going to require an additional 300,000 plus housing units. It's going to be a variety of different housing units, whether it's multifamily or single family or NOAA. Those production responsibilities are going to fall on everybody. And so as we go about this process of seeing a little bit of growth in our town relative to the rest of the metro area, and it's in market rate primarily, I think the city has been looking at this, at least the way I have been looking at it, is that if we want to make an investment in these market rate buildings to make sure that we accomplish our goals regarding affordable housing, then we need to step up. Because you can't expect the developers anymore to be able to, you know, require of them 10% affordability in perpetuity on a project and have it be feasible, and so then nothing happens in your town with respect to your obligations around creating housing. So, though this is a significant amount of money, we do have sources available that are helpful, and this potential use of spark funds I thought was pretty creative. And then to pick up those, as Commissioner Agnew said, those additional 3 units that we're going to be getting, and some of them larger in nature, in perpetuity, is something worth seriously thinking about under either scenario. So what I hear you in your presentation suggesting is that you're probably leaning towards scenario number 2. You didn't really tell us, but the data kind of directs you towards scenario number 2. Is that a fair assumption?
I, as staff, am seeking I recommend scenario number 2, yes.
Okay, okay. And did our financial advisors reinforce that?
I think we are in alignment on that for the long-term benefit to the city.
Okay, I remember Commissioner Risser has a question.
Actually,
comment.
it's more of a comment. I just want to underscore, a third of this amount is $1.6 million that could go to our general fund. And I just want to say that. And what could that fund? We know what got cut on Tuesday. So, yes, there is a responsibility to help with the housing crisis, and it is a housing crisis. But at the same time, there's a responsibility to make sure our fundamental services are there, our basic infrastructure is maintained, all of that. So I really, scenario 3, where it could be a commercial building, doesn't bother me that much, but seeing nearly $5 million of spark funds going toward this, I do have concerns about that, and it is all about balance. Thank you.
Commissioners, I think we're in the comment phase.
I'll add some comments.
Yes, Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you. I particularly love that the additional units here would be larger units. I think that that's so important. It means that potentially a family could come into this community and live there. And I appreciate Commissioner Risser's comments as well, because that's how I always think about these equations, right? Like, what else could we do with this money? When I think about whether we look at it from the analysis of the additional amount, given that we've already approved some spark funds for this use case, understanding, yes, we'd have to go through a more rigorous process to leverage that. Or, as Commissioner Risser mentioned, the 1.6 million, right? So kind of using that analysis of, if we gave back these spark funds and the city of Edina got $1.6 million to do something with that money, I think that that's a very fair comparison of what else could we do with this money. We would be getting, then in that equation, 15 units of affordable housing in perpetuity. And we have said that as a city, it is a priority for us to look into increasing the affordable, attainable units that we have within our community. And I can't think of any other way that we could get 15 units using that same kind of analysis and equation for $1.6 million if it did come back to the community. And so, because we have stated that that's a priority, because we have Manager Hawkinson in your role, and because we've been looking for how are there opportunities to continue investing into this. I know that we've made a lot of progress, but I think this is a really great opportunity to get those affordable units, but also do so at the larger side. Having the 2 bedrooms, I think, is really key. So I will be supporting this. I think that this is a nice opportunity, and I can't think of a better way at this point to use that funding, applying that same equation, and knowing that we have identified this as a priority. So thank you.
Commissioner Jackson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm in favor of this, but my thoughts keep going to that hole in the ground. And it was a rundown building with graffiti and flooding and a broken parking lot, and now it's a hole in the ground. And the alternative of turning that into a parking lot until at some point in time somebody comes forward to figure out how to develop this and we go through the process over again, it's a lot of risk. This eliminates a lot of risk, and that's where my thoughts are, and I think this is a creative use, and I didn't get a chance to thank you for the work you've put into this. I really appreciate that. And the entire presentation actually was extremely helpful. But that's where my thoughts are, is the risk of hypothetical 3 is really high. And I want to get rid of the hole in the ground. France Avenue deserves to be developed, and it's an important real estate in our town. And I don't want it to be a parking lot until some point in time, maybe even a bigger project has to be built to make this all work. So I want to mitigate risk, and thank you again for coming forward with this.
I think every project we analyze as a potential addition to the city of Edina that adds more density and more capacity from a housing standpoint involves an analysis of the impact on our infrastructure, on our services. And as we listen to, whether it's you or Manager Neuendorf, talk about I won't call it de minimis, but the minority situations, about 10% of the time where we're using tax increment financing to achieve a public objective. That's all part of the analysis. We just talked about that relative to the Macy's site. The first call that Manager Neuendorf makes is to our public safety people and other people and our internal staff to find out how is this project going to affect the operations of the city and the stresses on the city that we might have. And so that's an important consideration, I think. This is also a moment for me where it's kind of, well, okay, you're going to have an affordable housing policy, you're going to mandate certain things, you think this is an important public objective. This is kind of a put your money where your mouth is moment. And though there are other stresses that we have in our town or other challenges that we have around budgeting and forecasting and looking at how we're going to run our town in the future and achieve the kind of service delivery that we want, and make the capital improvements that we want to make, take care of what we own together. That's an analysis we're going to probably undertake, as we talked about at our city council meeting on Tuesday night, for the next year. And so where we have an opportunity to use spark funds to accomplish some of the goals that we have said we want to accomplish, and not use TIF funds to do some of the things that we said were indeed important in our community, and that's why we have this policy, then this is one of those moments where we get to step up. We're going to step up or not. So I think I joined the majority of my colleagues in saying I support this as well. I think it's something that we need to do. And it's had a thorough vetting and analysis. What creates a lot of comfort for me is not only your analysis, but the analysis of I would say the first-rate team that we use as advisors from both Dorsey, Mr. Lindgren, and Mr. Enhut from Ellers. I mean, you can't have a better duo to help you analyze these projects to make sure it fits and aligns with what the city wants to accomplish. So I'm in favor of this as well. And I would favor scenario number 2 and be consistent with what you're thinking about. So I don't know if Member Risser, you have any additional comments you'd like to make? Everybody else has had a chance to make theirs. I don't know if you had a chance to finish your thoughts.
I do. I mean, we need to figure out how to fund our infrastructure and how to fund our civic responsibilities, our fire, our police. And when we put money toward projects that are TIF financed, we are cutting off flow of revenue into the general fund. And that's a problem. And it's, I think, something that's contributing to where we are right now. And, you know, it's troubling to think about, well, okay, so where is the money going to come from for the things that we need? And yes, we're getting affordable housing, we're getting more market rate. And we can be the city that really provides, and it would be nice to have those numbers beyond what the Met Council advised us to build for market rate. And I know we've got vacancies. There's been articles in the Star Tribune about the vacancy rate for market rate being higher in the western suburbs. We are one of those suburbs. So all of these are factoring in, and we can hear, dialogue about how investment in building more market rate is harder now because people can take their money elsewhere. Well, the stock market is taking quite a run this week. And so, those things always change, but, we need to have decent park facilities, especially in neighborhoods where we have already added affordable housing. We need to fund our firefighters so that they are not doing shifts that are mandatory shifts that maybe they can't staff enough of their engines when there's more than one crisis going on. All of those things. So thank you for asking if I had something more to say. And I think that's it. And so thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit to that because I agree in the sense that we full-heartedly need to support all of our resources, right? We need to invest into the new fire station. We need to invest into public safety. But I completely disagree with the statement that this is taking money away from that. We continue to invest at the same level. If there's nothing else on this site, there is no tax revenue. And so I just don't want the message to be that we are choosing to build this in exchange for investment into our public services, because that's not the reality.
I think that's I want to push back against that, because I think in a way we're entering into an area with perspective, and we could take this money, it could go to the general fund. And yes, you look at TIF and what it finances, and ultimately you're supposed to end up with more revenues flowing into the general fund, but there's this vast period of time where that doesn't happen. And even when, as we know here in Edina, you decertify a TIF district, that's no guarantee the money's going to start flowing back to the general fund. So I think, in hypotheticals, what this would be versus a commercial site, well, again, back to the idea of total cost. We don't bring in total cost. And so I think there's room for a little nuance and not necessarily a binary right or wrong in this situation. Thank you.
Commissioner Jackson.
We are going to have an entire year in 2025 of talking about the budget, and I think that's the appropriate time to have that conversation. This is about whether we want this development to move forward, and I'm in favor of that, and we'll have the discussion. I think we're all on, the edge of our seat with discomfort on the budget, but we've got a whole year to talk about that. Thank you.
The other comment I would have is that I think as we work on these various issues that are financial related over the next year, we're going to find a way to quantify the net benefit of the increased density in our community. So if you think about no more growth and putting the burden on people that are already here to take care of what we own together and expand and do the things we want to do from a capital improvement standpoint, the burden would be even higher than if we were adding density. We need to find a way to define that, but there's a net benefit in density, and we've seen presentations on that over the years, and we can drill down on that significantly, I think, and show that the strategies we're employing around growth have a significant benefit to our community. So, all right. So you've got here a motion that's recommended that doesn't define the scenario. Is that purposeful? You wanted us to have a conversation about that?
I shall approve redevelopment agreement for 7200 France, apartments reflecting terms and conditions of 15 units, affordable for perpetuity, and First Amendment to the 7200, 7250 redevelopment agreement.
That gives you scenario two.
That's scenario two.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought. Just want to make sure. All right, is there a motion to approve the redevelopment agreement for 7200 France Avenue apartments reflecting the terms and conditions of 15 units? It'd be an amendment to that agreement, 15 units which creates 10% affordability in perpetuity, and by First Amendment to the 7200-7250 redevelopment agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to adopt the motion as stated, which would amend the, provide a First Amendment to the redevelopment agreement at 7200-7250 to provide for terms and conditions, additional terms and conditions for achieving 15 units of affordability in those units for perpetuity. That's 10% of the units. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Carried. Motion carries. The amendment to the redevelopment agreement is approved. Thank you for everybody that participated in this conversation to achieve this level of affordability and this level of increased number of homes for people in our community as well. And now we've got the next matter is one that it's a more of a, I think, a informational sort of item, an update as opposed to an action item. No action being required at this point in time. But I think important update for all of us on this issue around the loan agreement with the Edina Chamber of Commerce. So, and we have, even in this difficult weather this morning, a lot of folks rolling in to have the conversation. And we've got Manager Neuendorf, our Economic Development Manager, is going to lead the conversation on this.
Yes, good morning, thank you. I'll provide an overview this morning and then turn it over to our guests from the Chamber of Commerce. As you mentioned this morning, this is an update only. We wanted to get a conversation started, so we're not seeking any action today, but wanted to prep you that in the near future we will be seeking action. We're hoping to get some guidance and direction from you as the Chamber puts some thoughts together in the new year. So in the packet, there's a staff report. There's not a big formal presentation or anything. But just as background, a reminder that in 2022, using Spark funds, we issued a construction loan to the Chamber of Commerce with the intention of launching a new business accelerator program. Something that had been talked about in Edina for several years. It seemed like the right time to do it as we came out of the pandemic and funds were available. We authorized up to $800,000 in loan proceeds to be repaid over a 7-year period. The construction did go forward. The lab and the facility was built and opened in November of 2023. And over the last 2 years, 4 cohorts of participants successfully completed the program. The full build-out actually came in under budget. It's always nice to see that. We initially had a construction loan of just approximately $651,000. So we came in under that maximum of $800,000. And part of that loan was to repay it, or it was structured mostly to be repaid, but portions of it are forgivable when specific milestones are met. So after the loan was issued, the Chamber of Commerce did make 2 payments in 2024, and they also did achieve that first milestone to forgive a portion of it. So as we stand here this morning, there's still a balance of approximately $469,000 on that loan. The lab program, I mentioned there are 4 successful cohorts that have been finished with that program, but unfortunately the program is not yielding the revenue at either the pace or the level that was first projected, and that is potentially a problem that we wanted to bring to the surface here today. In order to help address that reality, the Chamber of Commerce Board decided to spin off the lab as an independent entity earlier this year, with the intention that by separating physically, or not physically, but legally from the chamber, that they'd be able to attract more investment capital. So that's part of their restructuring and part of their plan. Unfortunately, that change, that separation, does remove the accelerator program, the lab, from any legal oversight by the chamber or from this body, the HRA. And part of the loan agreement was based on the fact that the HRA would have some level of involvement, although minor, to make sure that the lab did what we thought it would, what we thought it would do, and more importantly, did it in Edina. So potentially with that change, although done for good reasons, it does result in 2 violations of our loan agreement and potentially a third. So wanted to raise that to your attention. As we considered these potential violations, the loan agreement does identify what happens in the event of a default. First, we'd have to recognize these as a default and take action to do that. And there are several remedies in the contract that we could take. We're at a point where I'm not recommending, we call this a violation and a default on the contract. The Chamber of Commerce has every intention to repay the loan. They've made that abundantly clear to me, and they're here this morning to make that very clear to you. But I think we have to we need to have a frank conversation about the future of the lab because some of the terms and assumptions that we had in 2022 when we all did this for the first time just haven't proven true, or they haven't proven out. So in the near future, the Chamber is expected to do some restructuring to the lab and to their own organization in order to have 2 levels of success. As a Chamber of Commerce to do what they do, and as an innovation lab to help more businesses, more entrepreneurs to do what they do even better and more prosperously here in Edina. So in the near future, the Chamber does intend to present a full proposal. They have some general ideas today, but in today's meeting, we're hoping to get your guidance, some of your initial thoughts as they put their proposal together. We'll come back later, or come back in the new year with a recommended amendment or modification to that loan agreement. And with that, I'll turn it over to the crew from the Chamber. Shelley Loberg is here this morning, President of the Chamber. Annette Woldenauer, the CEO of the Big Innovation Lab. And then a few members of the Chamber of Commerce's board, Paul Moody, Mark Jessen, and Heidi Stinson are here this morning. So I'll turn it over to Shelley, and I'll be available for questions, but they can be the stars of the show this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Neuendorf. Morning, Ms. Loberg.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Interesting morning out there getting here. We're here this morning, and you all did receive a formal letter from me on December 10th. What we are asking today is a consideration of a deferment of the January payment. I have met with all of the members of the council. Mr. Hovland serves on our board of directors, as does Manager Neal. And so right now, what we are asking you to consider is a deferment of that January payment in order to give us a runway to build some funds for the Chamber to meaningfully contribute to a hopefully differently amortized payment in July. So first, what I would like to do is have Annette and 2 of her participants from the lab come up and not only talk about sort of where the lab is currently, but also so that you can hear the experiences of some of the entrepreneurs that have completed the course, and they can tell you how it has impacted their businesses, because we do believe that this is still an amazing community amenity that can not only help businesses in Edina, but other businesses in the Twin Cities region, which I think we feel as an organization, it's important that we're serving the whole Twin Cities area. We certainly want businesses from Edina to participate in the lab, but Annette has some new partnerships with neighboring municipalities as well that we think will help bring the lab into the future. So I'm going to have Annette and her cohort members come up. We have Logan Hershey from RBC Wealth Management and Brian Ruck, who is the owner of Groveland Confections.
Thank you, Ms. Loberg.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have a cough, so I'm not going to talk a lot, because if I talk a lot, I will cough more. So I'm going to just do a brief introduction and have both of my guys talk. So the Big Innovation Lab, when we structured it, as with most new businesses, we thought one way would work. And then we discovered that there are some other avenues that we need to be looking at, and that the revenue streams that we thought would come in have changed. So it's still a very viable business. It is still alive and doing its work. It's just doing it in maybe a different way than what we had originally thought. So Mayor Hubland has been very gracious in introducing me to the city of Bloomington. I've met with the city of Golden Valley, and I've got other municipalities that would like to tap into what we're doing, which is another income source for us. But really the most important thing is that it's a business accelerator for second stage businesses, not for startups. There's lots of great programs out there that are free for startups. We really want to help the second stage businesses, whether they've been in business for 3 years or 30 years, to help figure out what their next move is. How can they be successful in the future? What does that look like? And what's their plan to move forward? So with me today, we'll start with Brian. Brian bought Groveland Confections, which many of you know. And so he can talk about his experience with the lab.
Thank you, Ms. Goldenauer.
Good morning.
Morning.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having us. Again, my name is Brian. I'm the owner of Groveland Confections. The business has been around for about 20 years. My wife and I purchased the business last year. It's currently based in Minnetonka, but I myself, I'm a Edina resident. I got connected through to Annette through the Edina Chamber, and basically was looking for an avenue to be able to grow my business. I have a career in hospitality spanning 20 years, but not much experience in running an independent business. So I was in a very unique situation where I knew what I needed to do, but I didn't have the assets or the know-how or network to build that. So being a part of the lab has been fundamental in my growth. We've seen about a 700% growth in our wholesale business. It's allowed us to enter into markets like Kowalski's here in Edina and several other locations. We've been able to expand that. We are currently expanding our business aggressively as well, and hope to, for very selfish reasons, hope to bring it closer to home. To reduce a commute. So in future terms, that's something that I look forward to contributing to Edina's taxation here. But the lab has been a great outlet for me to be able to work with other individuals outside of my network, outside of a business group that I have developed on my own, with other peers to allow me to grow that in other ways that provide long-lasting knowledge that I didn't have, right? And also resources as well, and that has been fundamental in helping me make connections, get into places like Kowalski's, grow the business continuously. It has been a great avenue for us to be able to continue to grow as a business, but also assist each other as cohorts, not just within independent units, but as collective between the 4 groups so far. It's been a great collaboration, and that's very invested in our success and growth. And we're very, from our end, very thankful for what she's been able to contribute for our business. So I'm not sure if that was the extent of what you need. I could keep talking, but I will hand the mic over to Logan.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. As Annette had said, my name is Logan Hershey. I work at RBC Wealth Management and run an advisory practice there. When I first met Annette, it was at a chamber event, and it was the infancy of the lab, and really the idea of the lab. And from that moment, I knew the lab was going to be something special. I wanted to be a part of it. Just didn't know when that would happen. But a little bit of background of me, I started as a CPA at Deloitte & Touche. I like to say I'm a recovering CPA now, but joined an advisory practice with my father-in-law here, and our office isn't just in Centennial Lakes, but the lab really helped me, as I was growing my business, bringing on new clients, excuse me, you don't know where to start. And if anyone knows financial advisors, it's a very long sales process. It's a lot of relationship building. And it takes some time, and my focus really in the lab was, how do I best spend my time to build my business? And as a young entrepreneur, you're getting pulled in a million different directions. You're told to say yes to everything. And the lab really helped me focus in on what's most important for me, what's most important for my business. And Annette has a way of just bringing in really great people and collaborating with those people, getting their perspectives whether they were in a similar industry or something completely different was really helpful. And the other thing I think that is special about the program, once you go through the cohort, you're part of this community where there's continued events, where there's continued collaboration. It's not just a one-time thing. So, yeah, being part of the lab was a very special experience for me, and I hope to see it continue, and I can't wait to see what's in store for the lab in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask?
I think you could elaborate a little bit on some of the potential new revenue streams that we've been talking about with, like the city of Bloomington and the city of Golden Valley. What are the conversations about with those cities?
Yeah, so the city of Bloomington is already in process. I have a contract with them, and I'm doing some training with them and then some individual business consulting to help them get their businesses ready, because they would like to have some of their businesses go through the big lab. So getting them ready to come and be part of the big innovation lab is part of what their goal is. They, in Bloomington, they developed a hatch program, and there are some huge holes in where they started and what they've done and where they want to go with that program. So they've engaged with me to come in and help with those hatch participants and the winners of that hatch competition, to help them make sure that they're successful. They, not that I want to talk about their program too much, but they offered $100,000 for somebody who won the hatch program. And as we all know, if you're building a brick and mortar, $100,000 is a great gift, but it doesn't go very far. So part of what I'm going to be doing is helping them to make sure that they're maximizing their dollars. The city of Golden Valley is a different thing. They're trying to revitalize their business community, and they don't have really a plan in place. So the mayor of Golden Valley and the city manager have engaged conversations with me, which we will be having another conversation beginning of January, to help them build out their business community and do it in a meaningful way. They have a lot of businesses in Golden Valley that have been around for a long time, that are stuck, that don't know what to do. And that's where we can come in and help them.
And that's a model you think you can extend to other communities as well?
Absolutely, yes. So we're looking at other revenue streams, but always coming back to our core belief in education for entrepreneurs that are in their second stage.
Other commissioners may have questions or comments. I know you've met with many of them. Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, this is a question more for Ms. Loberg. So first of all, before you guys go away, I'm so pleased that we have the Edina Innovation Lab here. It's the gap between a startup and a fully established business is a big one, and this is a big need in every business community. We are so lucky that we have you here in Edina, and I'm just very grateful for the work that you do, not only for filling that gap, but also for the fellowship of business leaders. I've heard many times it's a very lonely job, and to have peers who you can go to ask questions is phenomenal. And so I'm very grateful for the work that you do, and grateful for the businesses that have gone through the cohorts. So I don't know if this is what you're asking for today, but I believe with the reorganization, the terms of the loan actually go with the Innovation Lab, and we're talking more about putting them towards the chamber. Is that correct, Ms. Loberg?
That is correct. So one thing to note is that when our board allowed the separation of the lab to become its own B corporation, we did specify that the lab would remain in Edina until the loan is paid off. But one of the other specifications was that the debt would not follow the lab, because that would be detrimental to their financial success in the future. And the agreement that that the government made was with the Chamber of Commerce. So the Chamber of Commerce remains responsible for the debt in the separation agreement.
Okay, good. So, and then the Innovation Lab would be a source of revenue to you to help pay off this loan. Is that correct?
When they are at a point where they can contribute, we will create a lease and they will pay rent. And that will be the first priority. So I would say in the longer term, yes, the hope would be that they would contribute to the debt. But in the shorter term, we just want them to be able to continue serving the business community and the region. And so we need a different plan for repayment, and that would be, like I mentioned, the request today is really to defer the January payment so that we have a path, so that we can create a path to make more affordable payments. And until the lab is in a position to meaningfully contribute to that, Explore Edina and the Chamber of Commerce would be making that payment.
Okay, so I want to be perfectly clear. I'm in favor of helping this to work.
Yeah.
And so I would be in favor of restructuring the loan, deferring the January payment to make that happen. I would also like this to be a vehicle for keeping the innovation lab here, which is your plan, and I just want to endorse that. One thing that I actually have a request, and in the election last year, there was a lot of talk about city council having office hours.
Yeah.
We don't have offices.
Yeah.
So as we look about renegotiating this and everything, I would like one of the elements to be that we would be able to use part of the space to meet with the public as a city council, because we literally don't have offices, even a locker here at City Hall. So we need a place that maybe isn't an open public coffee shop sometimes to have meetings, and I'd like that to be a factor in the negotiations, please.
Yeah, absolutely, and we did discuss that, and our board and I am very in favor. And actually, the city is currently using the space on a regular basis with its leadership teams. We've hosted Jennifer's communication team, we've hosted the leadership team, we've hosted a human resources team, and welcome the opportunity to continue to do that so that it is truly a community space. I guess the thing that's important to me is to stress that this is a unique partnership that doesn't exist in other communities, and I do think that we need to find a path for it to be successful. And that includes the financial success of all of these entities. Certainly the Innovation Lab is a consideration, but also the Chamber of Commerce and Explore Edina and their revenue streams need to also be taken into consideration. And so what we intend to come back and present to you is a modified budget where we are making shifts in our activities, and that will include continuing to elevate Explore Edina as a strong brand and the marketing arm of the city, that will continue to elevate tourism businesses regionally with marketing campaigns in the 5-state area, but then also connecting those tourism campaigns to hyper-local messages that will continue to elevate our business community. And I think that will continue to really connect, instead of having the Chamber and Visitor Bureau have these like separate missions, to really have them more intertwined.
So, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I personally really value the partnership between the Chamber, all your entities, and the city. So thank you so much.
Same, thank you. We appreciate it as well.
Commissioner Risser.
Thank you. And it's been a week, so my head is kind of spinning, and I'm thinking about the Chamber, which is a nonprofit, Explore Edina, which was created in 2014 by the city of Edina with a principal purpose to, promote tourism and businesses in Edina. I may be getting that wrong.
That is accurate.
Is it? Okay.
Yes.
And then we have the Innovation Lab, which is a for-profit. And so right there, and today, I don't think I'm gonna walk out of here having a really good understanding of the ask and the implications. But if the Chamber and Explore Edina are taking over the loan that was made to the Innovation Lab, I just wanna make sure we're not doing something that we should not be doing. And I know Spark funds aren't supposed to go to government projects. And here's where, it's layer upon layer. So what is Explore Edina? It was created by the city. It is funded by lodging taxes.
Correct.
And so I'm not an attorney. My head is spinning. And I just want to know that what's before us is totally vetted, doesn't violate bylaws, doesn't violate anything that has to do with Spark, because I know you can't give it to a government entity, but if a government entity is going to assume the loan payments, what do I do with that?
Well, we are not a government entity. We are an independent nonprofit.
But what is Explore Edina?
Explore Edina is set up as part of the Edina Chamber of Commerce. It is set up, so initially in its inception, it had its own board of directors and was set up as a separate 501c6. And so they were basically running two 501c6s, out of the Chamber of Commerce. I don't recall in what year because I was not working on the chamber side yet, but they essentially made a decision to create one board of directors so we blended the Explore Edina board and the Chamber of Commerce board so that it is one 501c6. And so basically, Explore Edina is currently running as a program of the Chamber of Commerce.
That was so helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And if I could just clarify one thing, the loan is with the Edina Chamber of Commerce.
Not with the
Not with the
Innovation
lab.
Lab.
The loan is with the chamber.
So that's been
Yeah.
misstated a few times. The loan today is with the Edina Chamber of Commerce. That's not a change. That's how it was written.
Okay, but Explore Edina is going to help pay back the loan.
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner.
And it's my understanding the Innovation Lab is a 501c3 as it's being spun off. Is that correct?
It is a B corporation.
B corporation.
And that means that a B corporation essentially is a corporation that takes into account community well-being in addition to fiscal reasons. So it does not operate purely as a for-profit, but it is not a 501c3. And I'm happy to have Annette make more comments on that.
We do have so it is a B corporation, but we do have another arm, which is a 501c3.
So you're able to receive foundation grants?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, so we have both.
Okay, terrific, thank you.
Commissioner Risser.
And you do have stockholders, you do have shares of stock.
The Chamber of Commerce remains a 10% shareholder in the Innovation Lab, yes.
But the Innovation Lab does have stockholders? Okay, and then in the bylaws for the Explore Edina, it specifically says we can't have shareholders in the organization that's set up. And I get that this is distinct, but is there any issue with us financing an entity that has shareholders?
We are just a renter. The Innovation Lab will be renting from the chamber.
The chamber.
So it'd be like renting it to anyone. We'll have an agreement, we'll pay rent, which will help pay the loan.
Thank you.
I also just want to clarify the 501c3 status. The 501c3 was initially created by the Chamber of Commerce for completely other reasons before the Innovation Lab was created. As part of the separation agreement, we are allowing the 501c3 to be transferred to the Innovation Lab. If the Chamber wants its own 501c3 in the future, we will create another one. One of the challenges that Annette endured with fundraising, from a business perspective, the lab was not set up purely to financially exist on cohort members paying a fee to participate in the education. It was set up to also receive large donations from private donors, from family foundations, from business foundations. And one of the hiccups that we learned about was that many of these foundations were not wanting to make donations due to it being part of a Chamber of Commerce. Chambers are sometimes seen or regarded as advocacy organizations and can sometimes be mixed in local politics. That's really not as relevant anymore in today's Chamber of Commerce dealings. That's more the role of the state, the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, to do political advocacy at the legislative level. But historically, that is the reputation that chambers have. And so that was a stumbling block for the lab to receive money that it needed to be successful. So I wanted to make that clarification as well because I don't think that was mentioned.
Good, yes. Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you. I have a question for Manager Neundorf. If you could, I know we've talked about this in the past, but just could use a reminder. When we have money repaid from loans through Spark, what are we able to use that repaid money for?
We've learned a lot since we created the Spark program. Initially, we had hoped that when the funds were repaid, we could use it as a revolving loan fund. And as we learned more about the program and as the state auditor's office got involved and actually wrote rules on the state level, we learned that that is pretty unlikely to be possible. I don't know if we can say impossible, but pretty unlikely. So when the loans are repaid, essentially, and I'll ask Mr. Anhut to correct me if I'm wrong, essentially when they're repaid, they would be eventually determined to be excess TIF monies and then redistributed. So as Commissioner Rissler had mentioned this morning, a portion goes back to the city, a portion goes to the county, a portion goes to the schools, but then the state takes it from the school. But that would be years in the future.
So what happens, this is a very tactical question, here in the short term, you know, if you look at the report, the $41,000 every 6 months that's being paid back, what happens to that money immediately and in the short term?
At this point, when the monies are repaid, they're redeposited back into that Spark program. So technically, they could be available for the city to use and to earmark or pledge up until the deadline, which is coming up fast in about a year. So right now, they could be recycled, but there's not a lot of money in there right now from the payments.
Okay. So, and I know that we're not being asked to make that decision tonight, but this morning, oh my gosh. But the impact is if we were to defer the January payment and kind of lump that into subsequent payments. There's an opportunity in the short term, in the calendar year of 2025, that anywhere from $41,000 to the difference that might not get added to that next 2025 payment would not be eligible, or we wouldn't be able to reuse it. But anything that happens from a payment perspective after 2025, that's maybe if you could speak to that little gap, it might come back for a little bit, and then at some point in time, it gets redistributed to the state, or the county, excuse me, the school district, and Edina. But does it just kind of sit there until it's all recouped? What happens in that medium term?
So the medium term, do you mean after year-end 2025?
Yes.
I don't know. I wonder if Mr. Anhut knows. This is a new program in the state, so I'm not sure how the detailed mechanics work, but Nick might.
Excuse me. Actually, so any payment that is received after the deadline would go into the next fiscal year. There's actually written in the statute that any excess TIF, the authority, which would be the HRA in this instance, has 9 months to turn that money back to the county for redistribution. So any loan payment that would be received in 26, you would have until September of 27 to return those funds for redistribution, and then you would continue on that annual cycle as any kind of repayment is made.
That is exactly what I was looking for. Thank you very much. That's the only question I had.
Thank you. Cause anything else from anyone? Question for you, Mr. Neuendorf, or maybe for Ms. Loberg too. You mentioned there was a $469,000 balance on the Spark loan to the chamber. And we're going to talk about deferment of the potential January payment that's due, but there are also elements of the loan that were forgivable elements based on meeting certain criteria. In that $469,000 balance, are there elements of that that are forgivable elements that would further reduce the outstanding balance?
Sure.
Assuming these milestones are met.
Sure. Yes, there's still one more. So as the contract stands today, they'd still be eligible to be forgiven up to $100,000. So they would have to deliver those additional programs, meet those milestones. But yeah, of the $469,000 balance, $369,000 of that definitely has to be repaid, and then the $100,000 would be forgiven at some point.
And you'll be back in January with some ideas on restructuring?
I'm happy to work with the chamber. I don't know their schedule or anything of that sort.
That is the intention, yes.
But do we need to make a decision on deferment of the January payment today?
I was in conversations with our finance director. The current terms of the loan does allow for a late payment. There's a little fee attached to it. So it really depends on the pace of the restructuring and the referrals. But certainly, I think your verbal acknowledgement of a deferment without, I mean, if we wanted to, we could call the loan. And that's not my recommendation, so it might be helpful to have the board recognize that temporary deferment is acceptable without considering that a default. Might be helpful to have that on the record.
Well, the reason I'm concerned is it wasn't noticed up as an action item. And this is an agenda that's disseminated to the public at large, in addition to being published for our benefit. So the notion of a I guess a verbal sort of recognition of a deferment might be in order. Is that what you're saying? If we get a consensus out of the HRA? Or maybe Mr. Lindgren, I saw him arise and then sit back down again.
Not sure what they're asking for.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure I have a lot to offer. I was involved in the original loan, but in my understanding is the loan payment just wouldn't be made. It would still be owing, and it would be paid at some future point in time. So I'm not sure it's actually a formal deferral. And if it isn't a formal deferral, then no action would be required. If that's consistent with what you're thinking. And I'm kind of just jumping in here, so I apologize for that.
I do believe that's consistent, but our intention as a board is to come back to you in a month with an official request for a restructuring in which we would amortize the loan over a different repayment period that is more achievable for us as an organization. And that would be a time where we would be requesting an action and a restructuring of the payment schedule.
All right, thank you for that. That's some guidance, because we were getting, I think, some indication that you wanted to hear something today about deferment of the January payment, but it sounds like you'll be back in front of us with a formal proposal in January.
Correct. Yeah, this is part A. Part B is a more formal request. But I guess in the letter that I did submit, I did acknowledge that the desire is to defer the January payment.
Commissioner Risser.
And I would appreciate, when we're being asked to look at that, having as much detail as we can about expenses and revenue and all of that. And I did go back and I looked at the November 2020 meeting when the loan was approved. And at the same meeting, ARPA funds were approved. And the statement given at the time was those were going to be used in conjunction with the Edina Public Schools. And so more information on, and it seemed like Spark and ARPA were kind of working together. And so I would like more information on how those ARPA funds were used. And I would really appreciate that. I know the Shark Tank program was already up and running and the chamber was already engaged in that program before.
Correct.
So just if that could be part of the package, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And we have submitted reports on the spending of the ARPA funds.
Right, very good. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you for those presentations. All right, Manager Neal, did you want to give us a report out on 5146 Eden Avenue?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I'd like to defer our discussion on that, given our discussion around our budget and our immediate kind of fiscal future. I think I'd like to talk to Mr. Neuendorf more about that and come back and give you an update on it at a future meeting.
All right, very good. Any HRA member comments, commissioner comments? Commissioner Jackson.
Since this is the last meeting of the year, I have some thank yous to put out. I want to thank the people who repair our streets in the summer and plow our streets in the winter, the police and the firefighters who come to us when we're in peril, to all the public servants who make this city a great place to live, work, and play. I want to thank the gifts of my fellow city council members who contribute so much to our community, bring so many talents and perspectives. And I want to thank all the volunteers and the voters of a town. And on Tuesday night, we had Diane Plunkett-Latham and Bob Coteen here. And if there are two people who personify the culture of our city with their so much that they give back, was really inspiring to see them here. And I know that there are so many volunteers who spend their time, their talent, and their treasure. I don't think I've had a regular city council meeting where we didn't get gifts from the public, and that's extraordinary. And so, I'm so grateful to all the people who make this such a good city. So those are my comments.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Well said on behalf of yourself and all the rest of us as well. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season. There's some interesting and wonderful days on the calendar ahead of us. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So, second.
Commissioner Agnew moves and Commissioner Jackson seconds the adjournment of the HRA meeting this Thursday, December 19, 2024. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjournment say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. HRA meeting of December 19, 2024 stands adjourned. Thank you.